The open wastes of the Nev ice floe shone bright with reflected light from Hoth's distant sun as the 11th squad took their positions in the trenches. Some of the soldiers shivered as an icy wind blew in their faces, clawing its way through their winter gear to scour flesh and bone. They raised their rifles, scanning the horizon to the north, at first seeing nothing but distant peaks and flurries of wind-scattered snow. But then, small at first but growing larger, a series of small black shapes began to climb over the north ridge. The sergeant lifted a pair of macro binoculars to her eyes, and her heart quailed as she made out the lumbering shapes of AT-ATs slowly marching forward. Hello and welcome back to our latest series. Today, we're going to be looking back at another of the bloodiest battles in the history of the Star Wars galaxy, looking for insights into the soldiers who fought and died in them, with the goal of understanding the worst day of these beings' lives, and, in many cases, the last day of these beings' lives. Today, we'll be revisiting one of the Empire's greatest victories in the Galactic Civil War, the Battle of Hoth, from the Rebel perspective. Three years after the Battle of Yavin, the tide of the Galactic Civil War was turning against the Rebel Alliance. The Empire had responded to the Rebels' initial victories with enormous crackdowns, and the Alliance had been forced to abandon its bases at Yavin 4 and Boz Pity, losing lots of personnel and equipment in the process. In 1 ABY, the frozen planet Hoth was chosen to house the Alliance's new stronghold, Echo Base, where the Rebels coordinated their operations across the galaxy for the next 2 years. But their time on Hoth was limited, and they always knew it would be. Darth Vader's Death Squadron, a mighty task force consisting of dozens of Star Destroyers and the Star Dreadnought Executor, was scouring the galaxy for the Rebels' new base, and it was only a matter of time before the Rebels on Hoth were discovered. The Empire located Echo Base in 3 ABY, and Lord Vader immediately ordered Death Squadron to move to engage. Vader's original plan was to drop Death Squadron out of hyperspace on the edge of the system, move in close to Hoth under the cover of a meteor shower, and destroy Echo Base via long-range orbital bombardment before the Rebels knew they were there, catching them with their shields down. But Admiral Ozzel brought the fleet out of hyperspace too close to Hoth, allowing the Rebels to detect them immediately and activate Hoth's planetary shield. While Vader killed Ozzel for his stupidity, General Veers led a ground assault unit named Blizzard Force to the planet's surface, landing outside the shield perimeter and beginning a long advance toward Echo Base. As Blizzard Force's AT-ATs, AT-STs, and snowtroopers began the long advance southwest, the Rebels evacuated Echo Base and mustered their ground units to defend the base and provide cover for the escaping transports. Several units of Alliance Special Forces soldiers trained for cold weather operations, dubbed Wilderness Fighters, rallied in the trenches north of the base, manning turrets, while Rebel pilots took to the skies in snowspeeders. In the frozen trenches, the soldiers waited for the inevitable assault, while Blizzard Force slowly but surely crept toward them. The ground shook. It was subtle at first, but as it slowly became more noticeable, it was joined by a distant noise. The sound of enormous pistons whining, metal scraping against metal, and then the thunder of something huge slamming into the distant snow. The Alliance glanced around for the source of the noise, gazing suspiciously to the distant peaks to the north, but there was no sign of a source. Not yet. The noise continued, growing louder and louder, echoing across the icy flats, the low thunder of oncoming doom. The Wilderness Fighters began to file into the trenches of Beta Outpost, hunkering down in the shadow of stubby blaster cannons and dish-shaped energy turrets. The 11th Squad took their positions, some of the soldiers shivering as an icy wind swept across the trench, kicking up snow and blowing it in their faces. The sergeant, who hailed from a cold world, remained unfazed. She merely raised her rifle, seeing if she could make out anything through its scope, and her troops soon followed suit. There was nothing yet, but still the noise continued. But then, small at first but growing larger, a series of small black shapes began to climb over the north ridge. The sergeant looked again through her rifle's scope but couldn't make out anything. She lifted a pair of macro binoculars to her eyes and her heart quailed. As the device magnified the distant horizon, it presented the image of a huge metal foot crunching into the snow. A red visor set above a thicket of guns in a metal head, dwarfed by the vast slab of armor behind it. And then, finally, at a slightly lower magnification, the full picture, a column of Imperial walkers, steadily advancing. Even as the scouts relayed the news back to command, the machines opened fire. Red laser cannon blasts arced over the snowy flat and slammed into Beta Outpost. Each bolt birthed a fireball that turned snow to steam and vaporized soldiers, shattering turrets and sending a shower of blackened debris into the trenches. The turrets left unscathed by the first bombardment fired back, swiveling to face the north ridge and firing everything they had in the general direction of those slowly growing black dots to no noticeable effect. Some of the troops in the trenches opened fire next. They had spotted oncoming companies of snowtroopers and dutifully began mowing them down. The 11th squad joined in, the sergeant and their men picking out the remote shapes of armored troopers marching across snowdrifts, their flowing white masks and cloaks making them seem like vengeful ghosts rather than elite soldiers. The wilderness fighters began picking them off, but even as she watched trooper after trooper fall, the sergeant knew it was just a stalling measure. Another salvo of cannon fire from the AT-ATs arced overhead, laying waste to another column of turrets with a thunderous boom, deafening the soldiers of the 11th. In their hearts, the whole squad knew that the next bolt would be for them. The rebels put up a good fight. Their turrets shredded Blizzard Force's first wave of snowtrooper infantry and downed several of the smaller walkers, though they were entirely ineffective against the AT-ATs. The snowspeeders were even able to down a few of the massive walkers by tripping them up with their tow cables and firing on the disabled vehicle's vulnerable neck sections. In the end though, the defense of Echo Base was only a stalling measure. The rebels' defensive lines were eventually breached and the wilderness fighters were scattered. Some made it back to the transports before they took off, others were killed or captured. Once in range, General Veers's AT-AT destroyed Echo Base's power generator, disabling its shield and leaving the base vulnerable to orbital bombardment and direct infiltration. Fortunately for the Alliance, the base was already mostly evacuated by this point. The defenders had been able to buy their comrades enough time to launch most of their transports, which escaped the Hoth system thanks to covering fire from the rebels' ground-based ion cannon. As Echo Base began to collapse due to enemy fire, snowtroopers led by Darth Vader poured into it, seeking to capture as many rebels as they could. Nonetheless, all the rebel leaders on the planet, as well as Vader's primary target, Luke Skywalker, managed to escape. The Battle of Hoth was not, as Lord Vader and his men hoped, the end of the Rebel Alliance. It was, however, a devastating blow to the rebel cause. The rebels suffered thousands of casualties, and many of their personnel were captured by the Empire and shipped off to labor camps. 13 of the Alliance's evacuation transports managed to escape the planet. 17 were destroyed, and all personnel and supplies aboard them were lost. The survivors fled to join the rebel fleet, which briefly fled the galaxy entirely while it planned a counterattack. But the rebels inflicted substantial casualties on Imperial forces too, and the Battle of Hoth wasn't the end of the war. The battle set in motion a chain of events that led to Luke Skywalker becoming a Jedi Knight, and it emboldened the Empire into arrogance, inspiring the Emperor to set a trap at Endor that he hoped would finish off all that remained of the Alliance, a trap in which he himself would be the bait. This proved to be his undoing. Just a year after the Battle of Hoth, the Alliance, which was desperate in the wake of its earlier defeat, committed the whole rebel fleet to the Battle of Endor, and in contradiction of the Emperor's visions, they came out on top, dealing the Empire a blow that it would never recover from. Historians in later eras noted that they might not have taken this bait, nor won this crucial victory, were they not made desperate by the rout at Hoth. But that does it for today's video. What do you think of this series so far? Do you have any recommendations of other series that we could potentially start up in the future? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.